Dana Torres arrived at Airstar Airlines every morning at 5:30 a.m. sharp. Her thin face framed by hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the standard aviation technician uniform that somehow made her blend into the background of the bustling airport. At 42, she moved through the hangars like a ghost, efficient, invisible, forgotten. "Hey, Dana, add some cream, will you?" "Will you?" "The captain's a bit cranky today," called out Mike Peterson, a cocky 28-year-old co-pilot who barely looked at her as she poured coffee in the service compartment. His buddy Jake Martinez whistled mockingly. "Why don't you apply to be head flight attendant? You've got the coffee thing down pat." Dana simply smiled faintly and continued working in silence. What they didn't notice was how she meticulously checked 3 technical points that no one else bothered to examine: emergency door locks, pressure lights, and emergency rescue seats. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, muscle memory from another life entirely. The younger pilots would joke about her behind her back. "Dana's been here forever." Peterson would laugh during crew meetings. "Probably never even been on a plane as a passenger." They had no idea she had logged over 2,000 flight hours in military aircraft, or that when she watched planes taxi down the runway, her fingers would unconsciously trace flight patterns on her leg. Brett Williams, an older technician, had once glimpsed an old report with the name Dana Torres, instructor pilot, Tactical Unit 772. When he'd asked her about it, she'd replied softly, "You used to fly?" Just a few times, enough to remember how to land. But in everyone's eyes, Dana was just a nice coffee lady, a woman with no title, no noteworthy past. She had learned to blend into the background, finding dignity in small acts of service. Every morning at 5:30, every evening at 8 p.m., when she locked up the service area, she moved through her routine with quiet purpose. What the laughing pilots didn't know was that Dana Torres had been preparing her entire life for a moment that was coming tomorrow. A moment when her hidden skills would mean the difference between life and death for 198 passengers. But first, she had to survive another day of being invisible. As she wiped down the coffee station, overhearing Peterson and Martinez planning their weekend in Vegas, Dana caught her reflection in the stainless steel surface. For just a moment, she saw not the overlooked service worker, but the pilot she had never stopped being. The instinct to read wind patterns, to calculate approach angles, to feel an aircraft's rhythm, it all remained buried beneath years of silence. Tomorrow would change everything. But tonight, Dana Torres went home to her rented room, to the wooden box under her bed, filled with commendations and medals no one would ever see, and prepared for another day of serving coffee to people who would never know her real name had once been whispered with respect in military aviation circles across the country. 12 years earlier, Captain Dana Torres had been one of the most respected flight instructors at Lafayette Air Force Base. Selected to test pilot a new jet trainer model in adverse weather conditions, she was known for her steady nerves and innovative teaching methods. Her students often said she could make the impossible seem routine. That October morning had started like any other training flight. The weather was challenging, exactly the conditions the new T-308 trainer was designed to handle. Dana had then briefed her trainee, Lieutenant Ryan Brooks, thoroughly on the emergency procedures. Everything had been by the book until the system malfunctioned. "Instructor Torres, I'm losing hydraulic pressure." Brooks had panicked over the comm, his voice cracking with fear. "Stay calm, Brooks. Switch to manual backup. I've got the bird." Dana had responded, her voice steady as granite. But Brooks, overwhelmed by the alarm screaming in the cockpit, had activated his ejection seat prematurely. Dana had done everything right. She'd followed protocol, maintained composure, and brought the damaged aircraft back safely, despite flying solo with compromised systems. The landing had been textbook perfect under impossible conditions. She had saved both their lives and a multi-million-dollar aircraft. But command needed someone to blame for the failed test. The real cause, a faulty pressure sensor that had been flagged in previous reports but never replaced, was quietly buried in classified documents. Brooks, the son of a congressman, received additional training and eventually became a commercial pilot. The faulty system was redesigned without fanfare. Dana, as the training officer, was held responsible. Her instructor certification was revoked, and she was recommended for early retirement. No one defended her publicly. Not the colleagues who had praised her skills for years, not the students whose lives she had shaped, not the commanders who had relied on her expertise. "You can fight this," her lawyer had told her during their single meeting. The evidence shows system failure, not pilot error. But Dana had learned a harsh lesson that day. Competence without connections meant nothing. Skill without status was invisible. Excellence without politics was expendable. Instead of fighting it in court, she quietly signed the discharge papers. She didn't return home to her family in Colorado, didn't join the Veterans Association, never spoke of what happened. The incident replayed in her mind constantly during those first dark months. She had done everything right, yet somehow she was the one who fell. Now, as she served coffee to pilots half her age, Dana remembered that moment of betrayal. Every "Hey Dana" and casual dismissal was a reminder of how quickly respect could vanish. But she had also learned something else in those 12 years. Sometimes the most important battles are fought in silence, and sometimes the greatest strength comes from being underestimated. The military had taken her rank, but they couldn't take her skill. They had stripped her of recognition, but not her instincts. As she watched Peterson swagger past, bragging about his weekend flying hours, Dana quietly checked the emergency systems he had missed during his pre-flight inspection. She had been cast aside, but she had never stopped being ready. 6 months into Dana's 5th year at Airstar, the dynamic shifted when Captain Bruce Harrison was promoted to Chief of Flight Operations. Harrison was everything Dana had learned. To distrust politically connected, arrogant, and completely dismissive of ground crew. His first day, he'd walk past Dana as if she were part of the furniture. "Coffee better be hot and ready by 6 a.m. sharp," he'd announced to the service. "Staff, I don't have time for delays, and I don't accept excuses." Harrison instituted new rules seemingly designed to make life miserable for ground crew. Coffee had to be brewed to exact specifications, temperature measured, cream portions standardized, serving times logged. Any deviation resulted in written warnings. Dana watched as her colleagues began walking on eggshells, terrified of Harrison's unpredictable outbursts. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March. Dana had just finished her routine safety checks when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The emergency door seal on Flight 447 showed signs of stress fracturing. It was subtle, the kind of detail only someone with her background would catch, but potentially catastrophic. At altitude, she immediately filled out a maintenance report and submitted it to Harrison's office. 2 hours later, he stormed into the service area, his face red with anger. "Torres, what the hell is this?" He waved the report in the air. "Your coffee service, not maintenance. Stay in your lane." "Sir, that seal could fail during flight. It needs immediate attention before." "I don't want to hear it." Harrison's voice carried across the hangar, drawing stares from other workers. "You think you know better than our certified mechanics? You think you're some kind of expert?" Dana felt the familiar sting of dismissal, but this time was different. This wasn't about her pride or her past. This was about 180 passengers who would be boarding that plane in 4 hours. "I've seen this type of failure before," she said quietly. "In adverse conditions, that seal. Enough." Harrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Let me make something crystal clear. You serve coffee. You don't make decisions. You don't file reports. And if you ever go over my head again, you'll be looking for a new job. Do we understand each other? Dana nodded, but as Harrison walked away, she made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't stop him from dismissing her concerns, but she could document everything. That evening, she began keeping detailed records of every safety issue she observed, every maintenance concern that was ignored, every corner that was cut in the name of efficiency. Brett Williams, the older technician who had always treated her with respect, approached her later that day. You were right about that seal, he said quietly. Maintenance found stress fractures during their inspection. Harrison's claiming it was routine maintenance, but word is getting around. For the first time in years, Dana felt something she had almost forgotten, the quiet satisfaction of being right, and the growing realization that her voice, however dismissed, still mattered. Harrison had made his position clear, but Dana Torres had spent 12 years learning patience. She would bide her time, document everything, and wait for the moment when being underestimated would become Harrison's greatest mistake. Dana's approach was methodical and quiet. Every morning, she arrived 30 minutes earlier to conduct her unofficial safety inspections. Every evening, she stayed late to document discrepancies in a private notebook she kept locked in her car. She photographed maintenance issues with her phone, recorded dates and times, and began building a comprehensive picture of the safety culture at Airstar. The pattern became clear within weeks. Harrison consistently prioritized schedule over safety, pressuring mechanics to sign off on aircraft with questionable maintenance records. Spare parts orders were delayed to save money. Required inspections were abbreviated to keep planes in rotation. Dana's breakthrough came when she befriended Lisa Rodriguez, a young flight attendant who had noticed the same issues but didn't know what to do about them. I've been flying for 3 years, Lisa confided during a quiet moment in the break room. I've never seen corners cut like this. But who's going to listen to flight attendants? Someone who understands the system, Dana replied carefully. What exactly have you observed? Lisa's accounts confirmed Dana's worst fears. Cabin pressure irregularities dismissed as minor fluctuations. Emergency equipment inspections skipped to maintain turnaround times. Pilot complaints about aircraft performance filed but not addressed. The turning point came when Brett Williams approached Dana with devastating information. I've been here 18 years, he said, glancing around nervously. I've never seen anything like what Harrison's doing. He's got mechanics scared to file negative reports. But there's something you should know: the FAA is conducting surprise inspections next month. Anonymous complaint triggered it. Dana's pulse quickened. What kind of complaint? Safety violations. Multiple aircraft. Someone with detailed knowledge of aviation safety protocols filed a comprehensive report. Brett paused. Whoever did it knew exactly what to document and how to present it, like they had professional experience. That evening, Dana made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. She called the FAA inspector directly. Inspector James Coleman? This is Dana Torres from Airstar Airlines. I have additional information regarding your upcoming inspection. The phone was quiet for a moment. Ms. Torres, are you the individual who filed the initial complaint? No, sir. But I have documentation that might be relevant to your investigation. What's your position with Airstar? Dana hesitated, knowing how this would sound. Ground services. Coffee service, specifically. Another pause. Ma'am, with respect, these are complex technical issues. Inspector Coleman, I'm former Air Force instructor pilot, Tactical Unit 772. I know what I'm looking at. The tone of the conversation changed immediately. Can you be available for a confidential meeting tomorrow evening? As Dana hung up, she realized she had crossed a line from which there was no return. For 12 years, she had hidden her expertise, accepted invisibility, lived in the shadows of her former life. But 198 passengers would board Flight 223 to Albuquerque in 2 days, and she could no longer remain silent. Her war with Harrison was about to become very public. And this time, Dana Torres wasn't backing down. Inspector Coleman was a 20-year FAA veteran who had seen every type of aviation safety violation imaginable. What he hadn't expected was a woman in a ground services uniform who could discuss aircraft systems with the precision of a seasoned pilot. "Walk me through your concerns," Coleman said, as they met in the empty conference room at 7 p.m. Dana opened her notebook and began methodically presenting 6 months of documented evidence. Maintenance shortcuts, ignored safety protocols, pressured inspections. But it was her technical analysis that made Coleman sit up straight. "This hydraulic pressure variance you've documented on the 737 to 800 fleet," he said, studying her charts. "These readings indicate potential system degradation that could lead to catastrophic failure." "Yes, sir." "The pattern suggests worn seals in the backup hydraulic system. If primary hydraulic fails during flight, the backup system would likely fail within minutes." Coleman stared at her. "Miss Torres, this level of analysis. You weren't just a pilot, were you?" "I was a test pilot and instructor, specialized in emergency systems failure scenarios." Dana's voice was steady, professional. "I've seen what happens when these systems fail at altitude." The next morning, the FAA inspection team arrived unannounced. Harrison was furious, demanding to know who had triggered the investigation. He stormed through the facility, his face red with rage, questioning every employee. "Someone ratted us out," he snarled during an emergency management meeting. "When I find out who, they're gone." Gone. Dana continued her routine, serving coffee, performing her checks, staying invisible. But she watched as the inspectors methodically examined every aircraft, every maintenance record, every safety protocol. They found exactly what she had documented, and more. By noon, 3 aircraft were grounded pending immediate repairs. By evening, Harrison was in heated discussions with FAA officials, his voice carrying across the hangar as he tried to minimize the findings. "These are minor issues, easily corrected," he insisted. Routine maintenance that was already scheduled. But Inspector Coleman wasn't buying it. "Mr. Harrison, we have documented evidence of systematic safety violations. Someone with extensive aviation expertise has provided us with detailed analysis that shows a pattern of negligence." "Who?" Harrison demanded. "I want to know who filed this complaint." "That information is confidential. But I can tell you this, whoever it was knows aviation safety better than most of your certified mechanics." That evening, Harrison called an all-hands meeting. "I want every employee to understand something," he announced, his eyes scanning the assembled workers. "Whoever thinks they can undermine this operation by running to the FAA is mistaken. I will find out who's responsible, and when I do, they'll never work in aviation again." Dana sat in the back row, her face expressionless. But inside, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 12 years. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're fighting the right battle. Harrison could threaten all he wanted. The evidence was documented, the investigation was underway, and tomorrow morning, Flight 223 would have properly inspected emergency systems. She had spent 12 years being invisible. But sometimes, the most dangerous enemies are the ones you never see coming. The morning of Flight 223 dawned clear and cold. Dana arrived at her usual 5:30 a.m., but something felt different in the hangar. Conversation stopped when she walked by. Maintenance crews avoided eye contact. Word had spread that Harrison was conducting his own investigation to identify the snitch. Captain Brent Morris and co-pilot Daniel Cook were scheduled to fly the Seattle to Albuquerque route. Dana had observed Morris for years, a solid pilot with good instincts, though he'd been looking increasingly stressed under Harrison's management style. Cook was younger, less experienced, the type who relied heavily on automation and procedures. As Dana prepared the service compartment, she overheard Harrison speaking angrily into his phone. "I don't care what the FIA found. Someone in my operation is playing games, and I'm going to make an example of them." At 9:15 a.m., as passengers began boarding, Dana performed her final safety checks. Everything looked normal until she reached the cockpit. Captain Morris was slumped over the control panel, his face gray with perspiration. "Captain?" she called softly. "Are you all right?" Morris tried to straighten up, but his movements were unsteady, just tired. "Long night. I'll be fine once we're airborne." Dana had seen enough pilots to recognize the signs. Morris was ill, possibly seriously. Protocol demanded she report this to Harrison, but she knew what would happen. Harrison would pressure Morris to fly anyway rather than delay the flight and admit they had a problem. Instead, she quietly approached Lisa Rodriguez. "Keep an eye on Captain Morris during flight. If anything seems wrong, come find me immediately. You, Dana, your ground crew. Just trust me on this one." Flight 223 departed on schedule at 10:30 a.m. Dana watched from the service window as the aircraft lifted off, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. 90 minutes later, her worst fears were realized. Lisa burst through the service door, her face pale with panic. "Dana, Captain Morris collapsed. The plane is shaking, alarms are going off, and the co-pilot is freaking out." Without hesitation, Dana dropped her coffee tray and ran toward the aircraft access tunnel. Harrison stepped into her path, his face twisted with rage. "Where do you think you're going? There's an emergency on Flight 223. The captain is incapacitated. That's not your concern. Ground crew stays on the ground. People are going to die," Dana said quietly. "That's not your decision to make." Harrison grabbed her arm. "I don't know who you think you are, but your coffee service. Nothing more." For 12 years, Dana had accepted dismissal, swallowed her pride, stayed invisible. But as she looked at Harrison's face, she saw every commanding officer who had chosen politics over truth, every supervisor who had valued connections over competence. "You want to know who I am?" Her voice was steady, but something in her tone made Harrison step back. "I'm the pilot who's going to save 198 lives while you stand here protecting your ego." She pushed past him and ran toward the cockpit, Harrison shouting behind her that she was fired, that security would arrest her, that she would never work again. But Dana Torres was done being invisible. For the first time in 12 years, she was exactly where she belonged. The cockpit of Flight 223 was chaos. Captain Morris lay unconscious across the control panel, his weight having inadvertently triggered several switches. Co-pilot Cook was hyperventilating, his hands shaking as alarms screamed warnings throughout the aircraft. "Get out. You're not authorized to be here," Cook shouted when he saw Dana enter. "Open the auxiliary controls," Dana said calmly, her voice cutting through the noise. "I used to fly T-308s. This system is derived from that platform. You're the coffee lady. Security." But there was no time for protocols. The aircraft was losing altitude, the autopilot had disengaged, and Cook was too panicked to fly manually. Dana pushed past him and took the captain's seat, her hands immediately finding the controls with muscle memory that 15 years couldn't erase. Within seconds, the control panel stabilized. Dana manually adjusted the heading, leveled the aircraft. At 22,000 feet, and open communication with air traffic control. Flagstaff Control, this is Flight 223. We have an emergency. Captain is incapacitated, and I'm assuming control of the aircraft. Flight 223, identify yourself. Dana took a breath. For 12 years, she had hidden who she was. Not anymore. This is Dana Torres, former Air Force instructor pilot. Tactical Unit 772. I am qualified to fly this aircraft. The control tower fell silent for a moment. Then, Dana Torres, Unit 772. We have you on record. Flagstaff Airport is opening emergency runway 07. Full lighting activated. Emergency vehicles standing by. Can you bring her in? I've landed in 80-knot crosswinds before. This is a tailwind. Clear the approach. In the cabin, flight attendants were trying to calm 198 terrified passengers. But slowly, as the aircraft steadied and Dana's calm voice came over the intercom explaining the situation, panic began to subside. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. We're experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit, but the aircraft is stable and we're making our approach to Flagstaff Airport. Please remain seated and follow all crew instructions. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, every adjustment calculated and smooth. Co-pilot Cook watched in amazement as Dana executed procedures he'd only read about. In manuals. How are you doing this? He whispered. Experience, Dana replied, never taking her eyes off the instruments. And 15 years of waiting for this moment. As they began their final approach, Dana felt something she hadn't experienced since that day at Lafayette Air Force Base: complete clarity of purpose. This was what she had been training for her entire career. Not the routine flights, not the easy training exercises, but this moment when lives hung in the balance and every decision mattered. The runway appeared below them. Dana adjusted for wind shear, compensated for the aircraft's weight distribution, and brought the plane down with surgical precision. 18 minutes after taking control, Flight 223 touched down perfectly. As the aircraft rolled to a stop and emergency vehicles surrounded them, Dana quietly removed her hands from the controls and began shutting down systems. Co-pilot Cook stared at her with something approaching awe. Who are you really? Dana Torres looked at him and smiled. The first genuine smile she'd worn in 12 years. I'm the pilot who never stopped flying. The aftermath was swift and overwhelming. Passengers were evacuated safely. Captain Morris was rushed to the hospital. He recovered fully from what turned out to be a severe cardiac episode, and Dana found herself surrounded by FAA investigators, airline executives, and reporters who had caught wind of the story. Bruce Harrison arrived at the scene in a rage, demanding to know why an unauthorized person had been allowed in the cockpit. His tirade ended abruptly when Inspector Coleman pulled him aside. Mr. Harrison, that unauthorized person just saved 198 lives and an $80 million aircraft. She also happens to be the former Air Force instructor who provided us with the evidence that's going to shut down your operation. The news spread across social media within hours. A passenger's cell phone video of Dana calmly announcing the emergency landing went viral. Coffee server saves 198 lives mid-flight became the top trending story on every news platform. By evening, Dana's story had reached Andrews Air Force Base, where Major Rebecca Phillips, one of Dana's former students, was now a training commander. Phillips immediately issued a public statement. Captain Torres taught me to fly by instinct and integrity. Today she saved an entire plane with those same principles. The Air Force lost one of its finest pilots to politics, but aviation just gained a hero. The next morning, Airstar's CEO personally flew to Phoenix to meet with Dana. The airline offered her the position of Chief Safety Officer, with full pilot certification restoration and a salary that reflected her true expertise. I appreciate the offer, Dana said quietly. But I'd like to continue in ground operations. That's where I can do the most good. But you're qualified to be a captain again. You could have any position you want. Dana thought of the 12 years she'd spent being invisible. The lessons she'd learned about service without recognition. Strength without status. I want to train your ground crews to spot safety issues that pilots might miss. I want to teach flight attendants emergency procedures that could save lives. I want to make sure no aircraft leaves this airport without someone who truly understands aviation safety giving it final approval. The position created for a senior aviation safety specialist became a model for airlines across the country. Dana developed training programs that integrated ground crew expertise with flight operations, created protocols that prevented the kind of negligence Harrison had fostered, and quietly revolutionized how airlines approach safety culture. Harrison was terminated and faced federal charges for safety violations. Several pilots he had pressured came forward with stories of corners cut and concerns ignored. The FIJ investigation led to industry-wide changes in how safety complaints were handled. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in how Dana saw herself. She no longer moved through the airport like a ghost. Pilots sought her advice. Flight attendants asked her to review emergency procedures. And ground crews learned to see themselves as essential links in aviation safety rather than invisible support staff. 6 months later, during the annual Air Star Safety Recognition Ceremony, Dana was presented with the company's highest honor. As she stood at the podium looking out at an audience of colleagues who now understood exactly who she was, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 12 years ago, I learned that titles don't make you who you are, she said. Skills don't disappear because someone takes away your rank. Expertise doesn't vanish because people stop recognizing it. Today, I want every person in ground operations, every flight attendant, every maintenance worker to understand something. You are not invisible. Your knowledge matters. Your observations can save lives. And sometimes, the most important work happens in the shadows. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. But long after the applause faded, Dana Torres continued doing what she had always done, arriving at 5:30 a.m., staying until 8 p.m., checking every detail that others might miss. The difference was that now everyone understood they were watching. A master at work. The coffee server, who was actually a pilot, had finally come home. Not to the cockpit, but to her true calling, protecting lives through quiet excellence, serving others through invisible expertise, and proving that real strength isn't measured by recognition, but by readiness. In 18 minutes above the clouds, Dana Torres had saved 198 lives. But in the years that followed, her influence would touch thousands more pilots trained in her methods. Ground crews inspired by her example. Passengers kept safe by systems she had helped create. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that honor doesn't need a nameplate. Courage doesn't need to shout. And sometimes, the people who save us are the ones we never see coming. The warrior had never left her post. She had just been waiting for the world to remember what she had never forgotten. That being ready to serve is its own form of glory. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.